Your sister has a future. You stock shelves for a living, my mother announced. Her voice carried easily over the soft jazz music and the clinking of expensive crystal glasses. She is the success story. You are the one we hide from guests. My relatives laughed. 19 people threw their heads back and laughed out loud at me. I was standing in the shadows near the kitchen door, holding a heavy silver tray full of their dirty plates and empty champagne flutes. I watched my uncle Alden slap his knee. I watched my cousin Fallon cover her mouth to muffle her giggles. And I watched my younger sister, Blythe, sitting in her designer silk dress, lowering her eyes and swirling her wine, letting the joke run its course. The heat in my chest was immediate and suffocating. It was a familiar, acidic burn that I had swallowed for decades. For 23 years, I had been the family joke. I was the cautionary tale they whispered about to their children. The failure. The scapegoat. My mother, Corliss, had spent my entire life carefully crafting this narrative, carving me up in public so she could build a monument out of Blythe. Tonight was supposed to be the crowning achievement of that monument. We were celebrating Blythe's tech startup receiving a massive influx of funding. But as the laughter died down and my mother turned back to beam at her perfect daughter, a cold, hard focus settled over me. I did not drop the tray. I did not cry. My hands were remarkably steady. Because while they were laughing at the woman they thought I was, they had no idea who was actually standing in their dining room. They had no idea how high the situation was about to escalate, or the sheer magnitude of the avalanche that was already moving toward them. I slowly stood up straight. Then the door opened. My business partner walked in, put a contract on the table, and said, she just sold her investment firm for $1.8 billion. Did not anyone tell you? But let me back up, because you need to see exactly how far my mother was willing to push before I decided to burn her kingdom to the ground. The party was being held at my mother's sprawling estate in the suburbs. It was a house that looked like a magazine cover, but felt like a museum dedicated entirely to my sister. Everywhere you looked, there were framed articles, fake achievement awards, and carefully staged photos of Blythe looking radiant and successful. The air smelled of expensive catered food, roasted garlic, and the heavy, floral perfume my mother always wore to intimidate people. I had arrived at 6 in the evening. I had driven 40 minutes straight from a site visit at one of my properties. I was wearing a faded gray sweater and plain black slacks. I looked exactly like the person they all believed I was. My mother had met me at the door with a look I have been getting since I was 7 years old. A quick scan from top to bottom, filing me under a heading she decided on decades ago. She immediately handed me a stack of cocktail napkins and pointed toward the kitchen. Make yourself useful, Marin, she had said. Her tone was dripping with that false sweetness she used when she wanted to cut you deep without leaving a visible mark. Merritt's parents are here. Try not to hover near them. We want to make a good impression tonight. Merritt was Blythe's fiancé. He came from old money, the kind of money that bought you a seat at tables you never earned. He stood behind Blythe's chair all night, his hand resting on her shoulder like he owned her, steering every single conversation back to the $50 million valuation of her company. I had nodded at my mother, taken the napkins, and spent the next 2 hours clearing plates, refilling the ice bucket, and fetching fresh bottles of wine. I did it because resisting only ever gave Corliss the ammunition she wanted. I did it because a part of me, a small, stubborn, foolish part, still wondered if playing the role they assigned me would ever be enough to earn a shred of peace. It never was. Hope is a stubborn animal, but it does not die just because you starve it. I moved through my own family like a hired servant. And the strangest part, the part that still makes my chest tight, is that not one of those 19 people found it strange. To them, this was the natural order. Blythe sat and was served. The sun came up in the east. Marin carried the ice. No one offered to help me. No one asked how my day was. No one pulled out a chair for me to sit down. I was a ghost haunting my own family tree. Around 7 in the evening, my uncle Alden caught my wrist as I passed with the water pitcher. Alden was a loud, boisterous man who had co-signed one of Blythe's early business loans and had been dining out on the story ever since. He stood by the massive stone fireplace, holding court with a glass of bourbon in his free hand. I always knew Blythe had the mind of a founder. Alden boomed to Merritt's father, not even looking at me as he took the water pitcher from my grip. It is in the blood, you know. We are a family of visionaries. Corliss glided past me, her heavy silk dress rustling against the hardwood floor. She paused just long enough to lean in and whisper to her soon-to-be-in-laws, ensuring her voice was just loud enough for me to hear. Marin? Oh, she works at a supermarket. Stocks shelves mostly. It is honest work, I suppose. Poor thing, not everyone is blessed with a brain like Blythe's. She sighed, a tragic, theatrical sigh, painting herself as the long-suffering mother of a massive disappointment. I picked up a dirty plate from a nearby side table, keeping my face entirely blank. I walked back toward the kitchen, feeling the weight of their collective pity and disgust pressing against my back like a physical weight. I smiled a thin, invisible smile. My mother was right about one thing. I did spend a lot of time in supermarkets. I did look at shelves. What she did not know, what none of these 19 people drinking free wine knew, was exactly who owned those shelves. They thought they were looking at a failure. They were actually looking at the person holding the deed to their entire reality. How much more of this humiliation was I going to take before I let them see the monster they created? To understand the sheer cruelty of this night, you have to understand the museum of pain my mother built, exhibit by exhibit, year after year. We were not always living in a house with a chandelier. We were not always drinking expensive champagne and catering to old money families. When I was 14 and Blythe was 9, my father died unexpectedly, leaving us with nothing but a mountain of bad debt, a leaking roof, and a bank account that was rapidly draining into nothingness. Corliss panicked. She had never worked a day in her life, relying entirely on her looks and my father's fragile income to keep her afloat. When the money vanished, her pride did not. Instead of finding a job, instead of rolling up her sleeves and protecting her children, she found a plan. And her plan was Blythe. Blythe was pretty, delicate, and possessed the kind of wide-eyed charm that made adults want to empty their wallets for her. My mother looked at her youngest daughter and saw a winning lottery ticket. She looked at me, the practical, quiet, broad-shouldered teenager, and saw a beast of burden. She saw someone she could use. When the electricity bill arrived printed in angry red ink, threatening to cut off our power in the middle of winter, I was the one who went out and found a job. I got hired off the books at a massive regional grocery warehouse on the edge of town. I was 14 years old, working the night shift, moving heavy wooden pallets of canned goods and stocking massive industrial shelves until my muscles screamed in agony and my hands were covered in tiny, stinging cardboard cuts that never seemed to heal. The warehouse was freezing in the winter and suffocating in the summer. I would come home at 4 in the morning, smelling of dust and stale coffee, sleep for 3 exhausted hours, and then drag myself to high school. I did not have a social life. I did not have hobbies. I had a uniform and a time card. Every single dollar I made went into a rusty tin on the kitchen counter. And every single dollar in that tin went to funding the illusion of Blythe's perfect childhood. My money paid for the overdue light bills so Blythe could practice her ballet routines in a bright living room. My money bought her the expensive costumes. The most twisted part was that Corliss never once told Blythe where the money came from. When a brand new, expensive piano appeared in our living room on Blythe's 10th birthday, my mother told her it was a grant from a local arts charity. I stood in the doorway that morning, wearing my oversized gray coat, my fingers wrapped in cheap bandages to hide the bleeding blisters from the warehouse. I watched my sister trace the shiny black keys, her face lit up with pure joy. I had worked double shifts for 7 straight months to buy that piano. I bought it with my blood and my sweat. And my mother stood there, smiling gently, stroking Blythe's hair, erasing my existence entirely. "You see, Blythe," Corliss had said, her voice dripping with affection. "Special people get noticed. The universe provides for girls who have a future." When I finally confronted her in the kitchen later that night, asking why she lied about the money I had nearly killed myself to earn, Corliss had simply stirred her tea and looked at me with cold, flat eyes. Do not be selfish, Marin. Blythe needs confidence. Knowing her sister hauls boxes in the middle of the night makes us look like trash. She is going to be somebody. You are just here to help. I was the help. That was my official title in the family hierarchy. The final breaking point came when I was 18 years old. I had secretly applied to a top-tier business school, studying late into the night under the dim light of a single desk lamp after my warehouse shifts. Against all odds, I managed to secure a partial scholarship. But I needed exactly $2,000 to cover the remaining tuition gap and the dorm fees. I had been hiding cash in a worn paper envelope taped under my mattress for 2 entire years. Every extra shift, every skipped meal, went into that envelope. When the acceptance letter came, my heart soared. I went to retrieve the money to buy a money order and secure my future. The envelope was gone. The tape was peeled back, leaving a sticky residue on the bed frame. I found Corliss in the living room, casually flipping through a high-end fashion catalog. She did not even blink when I marched in, my chest heaving, and demanded to know where my savings went. Blythe needed a private vocal coach, she said without looking up from a page displaying diamond necklaces. She has an audition next month. It is an investment in her future. That was my college money, I said. My voice was trembling, a rare crack in my carefully built armor. I earned it. I bled for it. Oh, stop being dramatic, Corliss snapped, finally looking at me with pure, unfiltered disdain. You are not cut out for a fancy business school, Marin. Look at your hands. Look at your clothes. You are a worker. Be realistic. You can keep your job at the warehouse and help pay off this house. Your sister actually has potential. That was the moment the last string tying me to my mother snapped permanently. I did not scream. I did not throw things. The rage inside me bypassed fire and went straight to ice. I went to my room, packed a single duffel bag with my few belongings, and walked out the front door. I did not slam it. I closed it softly. I have closed a lot of doors softly in my life. When you grow up learning that any noise you make will just be used as evidence of your unstable nature, you learn to move like a ghost. I closed the door, walked 3 miles to a bus station in the pouring rain, and never looked back. I spent the next 2 decades building a fortress around my heart. But the foundation of that fortress was built on the ashes of that stolen envelope. When was the moment you realized you had to walk away from your own blood? I need to tell you the truth about my life now, so you understand the sheer, delicious irony of the situation I was standing in at that dining room party. I am not a grocery clerk. I have not been a grocery clerk since I was 19 years old. I am the founder and sole owner of Apex Holdings, a massive private equity firm that specializes in acquiring distressed retail chains, liquidating their bad debt, and rebuilding them into highly profitable empires. I own the supermarkets, all of them across 3 states. I own the warehouses, the distribution centers, the trucking fleets, and the land they are all built on. I turned the trauma of my youth into a financial juggernaut. But I am not the kind of CEO who sits in a glass tower looking down at spreadsheets all day. My philosophy, born from those brutal nights when I was 14 hauling pallets in the cold, is that you cannot fix a failing business unless you know exactly how the floor operates. The spreadsheets lie. The floor tells the truth. So, a few times a month, I put on a standard employee uniform, grab a clipboard or a pricing gun, and walk the aisles of the stores I just acquired. I stock shelves. I listen to the managers complain. I watch where the inefficiencies are hiding. It is the only way to find the rot and cut it out. 6 months ago, during one of these undercover site visits at a recently bankrupt chain in our hometown, my cousin Fallon walked into the dairy aisle. She saw me wearing a generic blue polo shirt, hauling a heavy plastic crate of milk cartons. She stopped dead in her tracks. She pulled out her phone. She took a picture. I saw her do it. She hurried away without saying a single word to me, and by that evening, the entire extended family had received the photo in a group chat I was not part of. The verdict was unanimous and permanent. Marin was 41 years old and still stocking shelves for minimum wage. The family outcast had proven them all right. I never corrected them. Why would I? Let them have their story. It kept them away from me. It kept them from asking me for money, from begging for jobs, from trying to claw their way into the peace I had built. But the universe has a wicked sense of humor. Because while I was quietly expanding my empire, Blythe was loudly building her tech startup. It was a software platform meant to revolutionize retail inventory management. My mother paraded Blythe around the state like a prized racehorse, bragging about her genius to anyone who would listen. Blythe was featured in local business magazines. She gave speeches at small networking events. What Corliss did not know, and what Blythe was desperately trying to hide behind her expensive silk dresses and leased luxury cars, was that the startup was a catastrophic failure. Blythe was excellent at giving interviews, but she had absolutely no idea how to run a business. She was bleeding cash, drowning in toxic debt, and lying on her financial reports to keep the investors at bay. 3 weeks before this dinner party, Blythe's board of directors panicked. They were days away from declaring bankruptcy and facing potential criminal fraud investigations for the numbers they had fabricated. In a desperate, final move, they sold the entire company for pennies on the dollar to a nameless, faceless investment fund just to clear their debts and avoid going to prison. That faceless investment fund was Apex Holdings. I bought my sister's company. I absorbed her debts, fired her incompetent management team overnight, and legally owned every single line of code she had ever claimed to invent. I did it because the core software had potential once stripped of Blythe's terrible leadership, and frankly, because it was a ruthless, solid business move. My name was buried deep in the acquisition paperwork under layers of corporate shell entities and legal jargon. Blythe only knew she had been bought out by a massive holding company based in the city. She had no idea the ghost in the machine holding the keys to her entire future was the sister she thought was stocking cans of soup. Which brings us back to the party. I stood by the kitchen island, wiping down the marble counter with a damp rag, listening to the swelling noise of celebration in the dining room. I had come tonight intending to eat a piece of cake, smile politely, and drive home to my quiet life. I was going to let Blythe pretend she was a visionary who secured a strategic buyout, rather than a desperate fraud who barely escaped financial ruin. I was going to let them keep their illusion, because taking it away felt like more effort than they were worth. But then I heard the sharp, demanding clink of a knife against crystal. Corliss was calling the room to attention. I picked up my rag, stepped out of the kitchen, and leaned against the wooden doorframe. It was time for the speech. The speech that would change the trajectory of our family forever. What happens when you hand a microphone to a liar who does not realize the truth is standing right behind them? The dining room fell completely silent as my mother stepped back, gesturing grandly to Blythe with her wine glass. Blythe stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her designer dress, making sure every single eye was fixed on her before she spoke. She had always been a master of taking the stage, a skill her mother had drilled into her since she was a toddler in ballet shoes. "Thank you, Mom," Blythe said. Her voice was trembling with perfectly calibrated emotion, sounding fragile but resilient. "And thank you all for being here tonight. This last year has been incredibly challenging. Building a company from the ground up, fighting for a vision that nobody else could see, it takes a toll on a person." She paused, lifting a delicate hand to wipe away a non-existent tear from her cheek. Merritt, her fiancé, reached up and rubbed her lower back in a show of profound, masculine support. He looked around the room, making sure everyone saw what a supportive partner he was to this brilliant woman. "But today, I can finally say that all those sleepless nights were worth it," Blythe continued, her voice rising in triumph. "Our startup was officially evaluated and acquired in a strategic partnership valued at $50 million. The room erupted into wild applause. My uncle Alden whistled loudly, stamping his foot. Merritt's parents beamed, their faces glowing with satisfaction, clearly thrilled that their son was marrying into such exceptional, wealthy stock. I stood in the doorway, staring at her, my rag clutched in my hand. $50 million. It was a staggering, audacious lie. The company was $48 million in debt. The actual buyout price I paid was barely enough to cover the legal fees and severances required to clean up her mess. Blythe was standing in front of 19 people, weaponizing a total failure into a historic triumph. She was looking them in the eye and lying with a terrifying ease. "That is what I am talking about," Alden bellowed over the clapping, raising his glass high in the air. "That is the genetics of this family right there. Pure drive. Pure intelligence. Well, except for some genetic mutations." He shot a pointed, mocking look straight at me. Several cousins snickered, hiding their smiles behind their hands. Fallon leaned over and whispered something to her husband, both of them glancing at my worn gray sweater and the damp rag I was holding. My Aunt Tamsin, who was seated near the end of the long table, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Tamsin was the only one who had ever shown me a sliver of kindness when I was a child. She had once given me a warm coat when Corliss refused to buy me one. Tamsin looked at me now, her eyes filled with pity, and mouthed across the room, "You do not have to listen to this, Marin." But I just offered her a small, tight smile. I looked at Merritt, who was puffing his chest out like a proud peacock. He was an investment banker, the kind of guy who lived and breathed status, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He thought he had landed a tech billionaire. I started doing the math in my head, calculating the exact trajectory of his ruin, wondering exactly how fast his smug smile would dissolve if he saw the real balance sheets resting on my desk back in the city. "I could not have done it without the support of this family," Blythe continued, turning her teary gaze to Corliss. "Mom, you always told me I was destined for greatness. You made me believe I could build an empire. You sacrificed so much for me. Because you were born for it, darling," Corliss cooed, her eyes shining with genuine pride. It was the look I had starved for my entire childhood, the look I had broken my back in a freezing warehouse trying to earn, freely given to the daughter who had just lied to her face. I should have walked away right then. I should have turned around, slipped out the back door, gotten into my car, and driven back to my real life. But there is a powerful gravitational pull to family trauma. It roots your feet to the floor, daring you to stay and see just how much damage they are willing to inflict before they are satisfied. Corliss was not satisfied yet. The applause faded, but my mother remained standing. She picked up a large, brightly wrapped box from the floor beside her chair and placed it directly in the center of the table. She looked directly at me, her smile sharpening into something lethal and intentional. I felt the air in the room shift. The temperature dropped. The natural order of things was about to be reestablished. The golden monument had been praised, and now the scapegoat needed to be sacrificed to appease the crowd. What twisted game was my mother about to play, and was I finally ready to stop being the victim? "Now, before we cut the cake," Corliss announced, her voice ringing out clear and loud, echoing off the high ceilings. "I have a little surprise. We are here celebrating Blythe's incredible career, but I do not want anyone feeling left out. Family is family, after all." She waved her hand at me, a dismissive, commanding flick of her wrist like she was calling a dog. "Come here, Marin. Come get your present." The room grew painfully quiet. 19 pairs of eyes swiveled to watch me standing in the doorway. I felt the familiar tightening in my throat, the old childhood instinct to shrink, to apologize, to disappear into the wallpaper. But the frightened 14-year-old girl was gone. I forced my feet to move. I walked slowly across the thick Persian rug, the silence stretching out, heavy and expectant, filled only with the sound of my sensible shoes against the floor. I stopped across the table from my mother. She pushed the brightly wrapped box toward me, her rings flashing under the chandelier. "Open it," she urged, her eyes bright with malicious glee. "I saw it and immediately thought of you. I know how hard you work at the supermarket, pacing those aisles, doing all that manual labor. I wanted to help you upgrade your career. Make you feel a little more professional in front of our distinguished guests." I looked down at the box. I reached out and slowly untied the silk ribbon. I pulled the expensive wrapping paper back and lifted the cardboard lid. Inside was a pricing gun. It was made of cheap, bright orange plastic. The kind of toy a child might use to play store, or the most basic, entry-level tool given to a trainee on their first day of work. Attached to the handle was a yellow sticky note written in my mother's elegant, cursive handwriting for the professional shelf stalker. Try to aim high. Someone snorted. Then Alden barked out a loud, booming laugh. Within seconds, the entire table broke into hysterics. Fallon was holding her stomach, tears of mirth in her eyes. Merritt's mother was chuckling politely behind her linen napkin, trying to maintain her dignity while enjoying the cruelty. I stood perfectly still, looking at the cheap piece of orange plastic in the box. I figure, Corliss raised her voice over the laughter, holding her wine glass aloft, delivering the line she had undoubtedly rehearsed in the mirror for days. Your sister has a future. You stock shelves for a living. She is the success story. You are the one we hide from guests. But at least now, you can put a price tag on your dignity. The laughter swelled into a deafening roar. I did not flinch. I did not cry. My nervous system, trained by decades of emotional warfare and high-stakes corporate negotiations, went dead calm. The panic I usually felt in these moments vanished entirely, replaced by an icy, terrifying clarity. I slowly lifted my head and looked at my sister. Blythe was not laughing. She was staring at her plate, her face flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. She looked incredibly awkward, shifting in her seat, but she did not say a single word. She did not tell them to stop. She let her fiancé chuckle. She let her mother publicly execute my self-esteem so that her fragile throne could remain secure. Her silence, her absolute cowardice in that exact second, was the catalyst. It was the final, unforgivable sin. If she had defended me, even once, I might have walked away. But she let me bleed. I reached into the box. I pulled out the orange plastic pricing gun. I set it down on the expensive linen tablecloth with a soft, definitive click that somehow cut through the noise of the room. "Thank you, Mom," I said. My voice was low, smooth, and completely devoid of fear. It cut through the laughter like a gunshot. The room began to quiet down rapidly, confused by my lack of a breakdown. They were waiting for me to run away crying, to slam a door, to give them a tantrum they could talk about for the next 5 years. Instead, I pulled out the empty, heavy mahogany chair next to Tamsin, right in the middle of the table. I sat down. Corliss frowned, her triumphant smile slipping slightly at the edges. "What are you doing, Marin? There are more dishes in the kitchen." "The dishes can wait," I said calmly, resting my hands flat on the table. My hands were perfectly steady. "I think I am going to stay for the rest of the party. My mother wanted me to be a supermarket employee." "Fine. But she forgot the cardinal rule of retail. The person stocking the shelves is the only one who knows the exact expiration date of every single item in the store." And looking at my family's smug, confused faces, I knew the expiration date of their delusion had just officially arrived. What would they do when the ghost finally decided to speak? The energy in the dining room curdled instantly. The remaining laughter died in their throats, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. 19 relatives stared at me as if a piece of the furniture had suddenly grown a mouth and started speaking. I was the help. The help did not sit at the main table. The help did not look the masters in the eye. "Marin, do not make a scene," Corliss hissed. Her voice dropped its sweet, maternal facade entirely, revealing the pure venom underneath. "You are embarrassing yourself in front of our guests. Get up." I ignored her. I reached into the deep pocket of my gray sweater and pulled out my second phone. Not my personal phone, the cheap one I let my family have the number to so they could ignore my texts. I pulled out the sleek, heavy, encrypted device I used to run Apex Holdings. I unlocked the screen with my thumb and opened a direct message thread with Hayes. Hayes was my primary business partner, my lead legal counsel, and one of the most ruthlessly efficient men on Wall Street. He had been managing the chaotic fallout of Blythe's startup acquisition all week, digging through the wreckage of her financial crimes. He was currently back at my penthouse in the city, drafting the final asset transfer documents that would strip Blythe of any remaining legal rights to her own code. I typed a single text message. "Bring the contract. The real one. To my mother's house. Right now." I hit send. Then I placed the expensive phone face down next to the cheap plastic pricing gun on the table. "I am not making a scene, Mom," I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. "I am just taking a short break. Stocking shelves is exhausting work." "You said it yourself." Merritt cleared his throat, looking highly annoyed by my sudden presence at the adults' table. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt and leaned forward, trying to assert his dominance over the sad, poor sister. "Listen, Marin. I know seeing Blythe reach this level of success might trigger some deep insecurities for you. It is natural. But tonight is about her. Let us keep it positive, all right? Do not ruin her night." I looked at Merritt. I looked at his perfectly styled hair and his arrogant, trusting eyes. He had absolutely no idea he was marrying a financial black hole. He thought he was securing his future. "Of course, Merritt," I said, my voice smooth as glass, dripping with a terrifying politeness. "We should absolutely talk about Blythe's success. Tell me, Blythe, how did the negotiations with the holding company go last week? Was it difficult convincing them that a company with $48 million in hidden liabilities was worth acquiring?" Blythe's head snapped up so fast I thought she might break her neck. All the color drained from her face in a single second, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a panic so profound it was almost beautiful to watch. Alden scoffed loudly, breaking the sudden, horrific silence. "What are you talking about, Marin? Hidden liabilities? Good Lord, you read one article in a checkout line magazine and think you are an economist. Stop being jealous and go back to the kitchen." "Yeah, Marin," Fallon chimed in, rolling her eyes and sipping her wine. "Leave the business talk to the people who actually wear suits to work. You are embarrassing yourself." I smiled. A real, genuine smile. It reached my eyes. It was the first time I had smiled in that house in 20 years. "You are right, Fallon," I said softly. "I should leave it to the professionals." The room descended into a tense, agonizing purgatory. Corliss was glaring daggers at me, her mind racing, trying to figure out how to physically remove me without causing a massive physical altercation in front of the wealthy in-laws. Blythe was staring at me with a look of pure, mounting horror, a tiny vertical line appearing between her eyebrows as her brain tried to calculate how the sister who worked at a grocery store knew the exact, classified number of her company's secret. Illegal debt. We sat there for 20 agonizing minutes. I did not speak. I just watched them squirm. I let the silence stretch and pull until it felt like a wire about to snap, humming with kinetic energy. And then, at exactly 8:15 in the evening, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the house. Boom. 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 Corliss jumped, visibly startled. She smoothed her dress rapidly and slapped her fake, welcoming smile back on her face. "Oh, that must be the caterers with the late dessert. I will get it." "Excuse me." She walked briskly out of the dining room and into the grand foyer. The rest of the table waited in silence. I reached out and gently spun the plastic pricing gun on the table, listening to the plastic scrape against the linen. We heard the heavy wooden door swing open. We heard my mother's voice, suddenly confused and faltering. "Oh, can I help you? Are you lost?" And then a voice answered. It was a voice that commanded boardrooms, a voice that brokered billion-dollar deals, a voice that did not ask for permission to enter any room on Earth. "I am not lost," Hayes said. His footsteps were heavy and authoritative on the hardwood floor, moving steadily toward the dining room. "I am looking for my partner." Thank you so much for watching part 1 of this story. If you want to see exactly how my business partner dismantled my family's lies in front of everyone, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my shoes. Part 2 is coming right up. The heavy footsteps stopped at the edge of the dining room. Every single person at the table turned their head toward the archway. Corliss trailed behind the newcomer, looking like a flustered bird that had just flown into a glass window. She was opening and closing her mouth, completely stripped of her usual commanding presence. And then, Hayes stepped into the light of the chandelier. Hayes was a man who did not just enter a room, he occupied it. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than my mother's car. He held a thick, black leather portfolio in one hand. He did not look at the expensive floral arrangements. He did not look at the catered food. He did not even look at Corliss. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the table until they locked onto me. Merritt, sitting next to Blythe, made a strange, choking sound. I watched as the color completely drained from Merritt's face. He scrambled to his feet so fast his heavy dining chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. He knocked over his own water glass, but he did not even notice the water spilling across the expensive linen tablecloth. "Mr. Hayes," Merritt stammered, his voice cracking like a terrified teenager. "Sir, I had no idea you were coming. We met last year at the Global Finance Summit in New York. I am Merritt. I am with the Regional Wealth Management Division at..." Hayes did not even look at him. He simply raised one hand, a silent, effortless gesture that instantly shut Merritt up. Merritt swallowed hard and sank back into his chair, looking like he had just seen a ghost. The arrogant investment banker, who had been puffing his chest out all night, was suddenly sweating through his tailored shirt. The rest of the family watched this interaction in stunned silence. They did not know who Hayes was, but they understood power. They understood that the man who had just walked into their home belonged to a completely different stratosphere of wealth and influence than anyone in this room. Hayes walked straight past my Uncle Alden. He walked past Blythe, who was still frozen in her seat. He stopped right next to my chair. He looked down at the cheap, bright orange plastic pricing gun resting next to my encrypted phone. A tiny, grim smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I told you to stop going to these family dinners, Marin," Hayes said softly, his voice a deep, steady rumble. "They are terrible for your blood pressure." I looked up at him. I could not help it. "I told you I needed to see it through, Hayes. Did you bring the paperwork?" Hayes nodded. He lifted the heavy black leather portfolio and dropped it right onto the center of the table, right next to the ridiculous cake that said "Congratulations to our visionary." The portfolio hit the table with a loud, heavy thud that made the crystal glasses rattle. "It is done," Hayes said, looking directly at me. "The ink is dry. The board finalized the vote 20 minutes ago. You just sold Apex Investment Holdings for $1.8 billion. The wire transfers will hit the accounts by Tuesday. Here is the final signature page. Do you have a pen, or should I borrow that plastic toy they gave you?" The silence that followed that statement was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears after a bomb goes off. 19 people stopped breathing at the exact same time. $1.8 billion. The number hung in the air, massive and incomprehensible. Corliss, who had finally caught up and was standing behind Hayes, dropped her wine glass. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered into 100 pieces, sending red wine splashing across the baseboards like blood. No one moved to clean it up. No one even looked at it. Hayes unbuttoned his suit jacket, turning his attention to the table of frozen, staring faces. He looked at Corliss, then at Alden, and finally at Blythe. "Your sister has a future," Hayes said, perfectly repeating the quote I had texted him earlier. He let the words hang there, exposing the sheer stupidity of them. "You stock shelves for a living. She is the success story. You are the one we hide from guests." Hayes laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of any humor. He looked at my mother. "I just handed a contract for $1.8 billion to the woman you hide from guests. Did not anyone tell you?" My Uncle Alden's mouth was hanging open. He looked from Hayes, to the heavy leather portfolio, to me in my faded gray sweater, and back to Hayes. "Marin?" Alden whispered, his voice weak. "Marin sold a company for what? That is impossible. Marin works at a grocery store. She is a shelf stalker." I slowly stood up from my chair. I did not rush. I took my time, letting the reality of the moment sink deep into their bones. The family dynamic had just violently shifted, and I wanted them to feel every single second of the impact. What happens when the scapegoat you spent decades kicking suddenly holds the keys to the entire kingdom? I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every single person who had laughed at me 10 minutes ago. They were staring at me like I was a stranger who had just broken into their house. I do work at a grocery store, Alden, I said smoothly. My voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. I have worked in a lot of grocery stores. I stock shelves. I check inventory. I mop the floors if there's a spill. You see, when you own a massive private equity firm that buys up failing retail chains, the only way to know if your investment is surviving is to put on a uniform and walk the floor yourself. I pointed at Cousin Fallon, who was currently pressing a trembling hand against her chest. 6 months ago, Fallon took a picture of me hauling milk crates at the local supermarket. She sent it to all of you. You all had a wonderful time laughing about the 41-year-old failure of the family. You never bothered to check who actually owned that supermarket. You never bothered to read the corporate acquisition filings. If you had, you would have seen my name at the very top of the board of directors. Fallon shrank back in her chair, her face burning with deep, ugly shame. She could not look me in the eye. I turned my attention to the head of the table. To Blythe. Blythe was shaking. Her hands were gripping the edges of the table so hard her knuckles were completely white. Her perfect makeup was starting to sweat. She looked like a trapped animal. And speaking of corporate acquisitions, I continued, my tone shifting from conversational to surgical. Let us talk about your visionary tech startup, Blythe. Let us talk about this $50 million success story we are all drinking champagne to celebrate tonight. Merritt leaned forward, his eyes darting frantically between me and his fiancée. What are you talking about, Marin? The buyout is public knowledge. The holding company sent the term sheet last week. I did not look at Merritt. I kept my eyes locked on my sister. Tell them, Blythe, I said softly. Tell them what the real balance sheet looked like. Tell them about the $48 million in toxic, hidden debt you were hiding from your investors. Tell them about the frantic, late-night board meetings where your own team threatened to hand you over to the federal authorities for financial fraud. Blythe let out a small, pathetic whimper. Tears finally spilled over her eyelashes, ruining her mascara. No, she whispered. Please, Marin. Do not. But I was not going to stop. I had waited 23 years for this. You stood up in front of this family and accepted their applause, I said, my voice rising just a fraction, filling the room with undeniable authority. You let them tear me down to make yourself look taller. So I am going to tell them the truth. Your startup was dead, Blythe. You were days away from bankruptcy and a criminal investigation. The holding company that bought you out for pennies on the dollar did not do it because you are a genius. They did it to liquidate your assets and fire your incompetent management team. I took a step closer to the table. And, do you know who owns that holding company, Blythe? Do you know who signed the final approval to absorb your $48 million disaster and save you from going to prison? Blythe's eyes went wide. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She gasped, clapping both hands over her mouth. That is right, I whispered, leaning over the table. It was me. I bought your failure. I own your code. I own your patents. I am the faceless investor who threw you a life raft while you were drowning. And I came here tonight intending to let you keep your little secret. I was going to eat a piece of cake and go home. I reached out and picked up the bright orange plastic pricing gun my mother had given me. It felt incredibly light in my hand. But then Mom handed me this, I said. And you sat there, Blythe. You sat there and you let her do it. You let them humiliate the person who secretly saved your entire life. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing right behind my uncle Alden. Alden was sweating profusely, his face a pale, sickly shade of gray. I reached down, pressed the trigger of the toy gun, and printed out a little white sticker. I placed the sticker right in the middle of Alden's forehead. He did not move. He did not even breathe. I think this belongs to you, Alden, I said quietly. Because your loyalty and your loud mouth are incredibly cheap. The entire family drama had just been flipped completely upside down. The golden child was a fraud. The scapegoat was a billionaire. And the enablers were sitting in terrified silence. But the worst betrayal of the night was not going to come from me. It was going to come from the man sitting right next to my sister. How fast does fake love evaporate when the money disappears? The silence in the room was suffocating. I walked back to my seat next to Tamsin and stood beside Hayes, who was watching the destruction with a look of calm, professional approval. Merritt slowly stood up. He did not look at Blythe. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, calculating, scanning the new landscape of power. The arrogant sneer he had worn all night was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, fawning desperation. "Marin," Merritt began, his voice slick with sudden respect. Miss Marin. I have to say, I am absolutely astounded. I have followed Apex Holdings for years. Your aggressive restructuring strategies in the retail sector are legendary on Wall Street. I had no idea that you were the mastermind behind it all. He stepped away from Blythe's chair, physically distancing himself from her as if her failure was contagious. He straightened his tie and offered me a sickeningly polite smile. I actually told Blythe just last month that her cash burn rate was unsustainable, Merritt lied smoothly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. I warned her that her management style lacked the necessary discipline. I always knew the valuation was inflated. If I had known Apex was the acquiring entity, I would have advised her to surrender immediately. Your financial philosophy is exactly what that messy company needs. Blythe stared at him, her mouth hanging open. The tears on her cheeks were forgotten, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. "Merritt?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What are you doing?" "We are getting married. You told me my vision was brilliant." Merritt finally looked down at her, his expression twisting into a mask of cold disgust. "Let us be realistic, Blythe. You lied to me. You lied to my parents." He gestured toward his mother and father, who were sitting rigidly in their chairs, looking horrified by the scandal unfolding before them. "You told me you were building an empire. Instead, you were building a massive fraud. I cannot tie my family's reputation to someone facing potential federal inquiries." He looked back at me, practically begging for my approval. "I hope you understand, Marin, that I had absolutely no part in her financial deception. My firm operates with the highest ethical standards." I looked at Merritt, feeling a wave of intense nausea. My mother had raised a monster in Blythe, but Merritt was a parasite. He was willing to throw the woman he supposedly loved under the bus the second her bank account dried up, all to kiss the ring of a billionaire he had been mocking just half an hour ago. "You are a coward, Merritt," I said flatly. My voice was quiet, but it held no mercy. "Take your parents and get out of this house. If you ever try to contact my sister or me again, I will personally buy the firm you work for and fire you on a Tuesday morning. Now walk." Merritt swallowed hard. His face flushed with anger and humiliation, but he did not dare argue. He knew I had the capital to destroy his career with a single phone call. He gestured sharply to his parents. They grabbed their coats and practically ran out the front door, leaving Blythe sitting alone at the head of the table, entirely abandoned. Blythe finally broke. A loud, ugly sob ripped through her chest. She put her head down on the expensive tablecloth and wept, her shoulders shaking violently. She was not crying for the lost startup. She was crying because the entire illusion of her perfect, golden life had just shattered into a million unfixable pieces. I knew it was fake. Blythe sobbed into her hands, her words muffled and wet. I knew I was failing. But Mom just kept pushing me. She kept booking interviews. She kept bragging to the neighbors. I was so scared. I was so tired of pretending to be a genius. I just wanted to stop. I am a fraud. I am a complete fraud. Corliss tried to speak, her voice trembling. "Blythe, darling, do not say that. You are brilliant. This is just a setback. Marin is just trying to confuse everyone." "Shut up, Mom," Blythe screamed, lifting her head, her face a mess of black mascara and tears. "Just shut up. It is gone. Everything is gone. I have nothing." Before Corliss could formulate another lie, there was a small movement at the end of the table. My Aunt Tamsin slowly stood up. She reached into her small, beaded purse with shaking hands. She pulled out a faded, folded piece of paper. It looked like an old bank check. Tamsin walked slowly toward me. The entire family watched her. She stopped in front of me and held out the piece of paper. Her eyes were swimming with tears. "Maren," Tamsin whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "5 years ago, when my breast cancer came back, the insurance refused to cover the experimental treatments. I was going to lose my house. I was going to die. And then, a nameless charity trust paid the entire hospital bill. They paid off my mortgage so I could rest." She looked down at the paper, then back up into my eyes. The letterhead on the transfer documents was from a subsidiary. But the final authorization signature, it just said Apex. Tamsin reached out and gently touched my arm. "Was it you? Did you save my life?" I looked at the aunt who had sneaked me a warm coat when I was freezing. The only person in this room who had ever looked at me with anything resembling love when I was a child. I nodded once. Just a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Tamsin let out a sharp cry and threw her arms around my neck, pulling me into a tight, desperate hug. She sobbed against my shoulder, repeating thank you over and over again. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence. The narrative was completely dead. I was not the jealous, bitter failure. I was the silent protector. I was the ghost who paid their debts while they laughed at my clothes. But my mother, with her deep, incurable narcissism, still refused to surrender. What happens when a cornered predator realizes it has absolutely no teeth left? Tamsin eventually pulled away, wiping her eyes, and stepped back to give me space. The room was heavy with the weight of 23 years of misjudgment. Most of my relatives were staring at their laps, entirely unable to meet my gaze. Even Uncle Alden had quietly peeled the white price sticker off his forehead and was staring blankly at the wall. But Corliss was not capable of shame. Shame requires self-awareness, and my mother had replaced her self-awareness with a desperate need for control decades ago. She stood at the end of the table, her face chalk white, her breathing shallow and fast. She looked at the heavy leather portfolio on the table, then at Hayes, and finally at me. Her mind was spinning, frantically trying to find a way to rewrite this disaster into a story where she was still the hero. She forced a smile. It was a ghastly, brittle thing that did not reach her eyes. "Well," Corliss said, her voice shaking violently despite her attempt to sound light and conversational. "Well, look at you, Maren. A billionaire. I have to say, you certainly kept that a secret from your own mother." She took a step toward me, clasping her hands together in front of her chest. "But do you see? Do you all see what I did?" She turned to address the silent room, her voice gaining a desperate, frantic volume. "I made her this way. If I had been soft on her, if I had coddled her the way other mothers do, she would have never developed this kind of drive. I gave her the thick skin she needed to survive the corporate world. I pushed you out of the nest, Maren, so you could learn to fly. I built this resilience in you. You owe your success to the standards I set." I stared at her. It was breathtaking. Her ability to twist reality to feed her own ego was truly terrifying. She was actually trying to take credit for the trauma she inflicted, branding her abuse as a masterclass in parenting. "We are a family," Corliss continued, moving closer, reaching out to touch my arm. "A family shares its victories. Apex Holdings, it is a family triumph. I am so proud of you, sweetheart. We can put all this ugliness behind us. You can move back home. We can combine your resources with Blythe's network." "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was not loud. It was barely above a whisper. But it carried a cold, absolute finality that made Corliss freeze instantly. She slowly pulled her hand back, her fake smile finally crumbling. "You did not build me, Mom," I said, looking directly into her panicked eyes. "You tried to bury me. I survived in spite of you, not because of you. I spent 23 years bleeding in boardrooms and working myself to the bone just to build a life where I never had to rely on your conditional love again." I turned to Hayes. Hayes smoothly opened the black leather portfolio. He bypassed the thick stack of acquisition documents and pulled out a single, crisp sheet of heavy legal paper. He handed it to me. Corliss watched the paper with wide, terrified eyes. "What is that?" she whispered. I looked down at the document. "This is a deed, Mom," I said. I looked up at the beautiful crystal chandelier, the expensive artwork on the walls, the sprawling, manicured estate that Corliss had used as her personal castle for the last decade. You have always lived beyond your means, I continued, my voice echoing in the vast room. You took out 3 separate mortgages on this house to fund Blythe's fake lifestyle. You bought designer clothes and hosted catered parties while ignoring the bank notices. Last month, the bank finally initiated foreclosure proceedings. You were going to be evicted by the sheriff next Tuesday. You kept it a secret from everyone, hoping Blythe's buyout would save you at the last minute. Corliss covered her mouth with a shaking hand. A strangled gasp escaped her throat. But the bank did not foreclose, I said, holding the paper up. Because a private real estate investment firm stepped in and bought the entire debt portfolio from the bank. They paid the principal in cash. They own the deed to this property free and clear. Corliss let out a shaky breath, a spark of desperate hope igniting in her eyes. You bought the house? You paid off my debt? Oh, Marin, I knew you loved me. I knew you would not let your mother lose her home. I did buy the house, Mom, I said softly. But I did not pay off your debt. I bought the property, which means I am now your sole landlord. I stepped forward and placed the legal document down on the table, right next to her broken wine glass. I am officially terminating your tenancy, I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. As the legal owner of this estate, I am giving you a standard 30-day eviction notice. You have 1 month to pack up your designer clothes, your fake awards, and your terrifying ego and get out of my house. Corliss stared at the paper as if it were a live snake. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. No, you cannot do that. I am your mother. You cannot throw me out on the street. Where will I go? I have no money. That sounds like a you problem, Mom, I said coldly. Maybe you can find a job stocking shelves at a grocery store. I hear it builds excellent character. Corliss's knees finally gave out. She collapsed into her heavy dining chair, her hands clutching her chest as she began to hyperventilate. She looked around the room, desperately seeking an ally. Alden? She gasped. Fallon? Help me. Talk to her. No one moved. My uncle looked at the floor. My cousins suddenly found her shoes incredibly interesting. They had spent their entire lives flocking to power, and the power in this room had just violently shifted. They were not going to risk the wrath of a billionaire to save a woman who had nothing left to offer them. Corliss was completely alone. Her empire of lies had burned to the ground in less than an hour. I turned my back on her, ready to walk out the front door and never return. But before I could reach the hallway, a hand grabbed the sleeve of my gray sweater. What was the golden child going to do now that her pedestal had been smashed? I stopped and turned around. It was Blythe. She had stood up from the table. She looked terrible. Her designer silk dress was wrinkled, her makeup was running down her face in dark, ugly streaks, and her eyes were red and swollen. But for the first time in my entire life, she did not look fake. She looked entirely, painfully human. She was holding her left hand up. On her ring finger sat the massive, glittering diamond engagement ring Merritt had given her. A ring I now knew was purchased on a high-interest credit line. Blythe reached over with her right hand, grabbed the diamond ring, and pulled it off her finger. She did not hesitate. She threw it across the room. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter and rolled away under a side table, abandoned in the dust. Marin, Blythe said. Her voice was raw and shaking, but it was surprisingly steady. I waited. I expected her to scream at me. I expected her to blame me for ruining her life, for exposing her fraud, for chasing away her wealthy fiancé. That is what Corliss would have trained her to do. Deflect, deny, attack. But Blythe just stood there, looking at my faded gray sweater and then looking at my face. I am so sorry, Blythe whispered. The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifyingly honest. The dining room was dead silent. Even Corliss had stopped hyperventilating to stare at her youngest daughter in shock. I let her do it, Blythe continued, tears welling up in her eyes again. I sat here and I let Mom hand you that plastic gun. I let them laugh at you. I have let them laugh at you my whole life because it was easier than admitting I was terrified. I knew the startup was failing. I knew I was a fraud. I was drowning, Marin. Every single day, I woke up feeling like I was suffocating under the pressure to be the golden child. I hated the person I was becoming, but I did not know how to stop the train. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup further. When Merritt walked out, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Blythe choked out, a wet, broken laugh escaping her lips. He did not love me. He loved the fake valuation. Mom does not love me either. She loves the bragging rights. Blythe, stop talking like this. Corliss shrieked from her chair, her voice shrill with panic. You're in shock. Do not apologize to her. Blythe did not even look at our mother. She kept her eyes locked entirely on me. You bought my company, Blythe said. You paid off the debt so I would not go to jail. Why? Why would you save me after how I treated you? I looked at my younger sister. I remembered the little girl who used to practice ballet in the living room while I hauled boxes in the freezing cold. She was a victim of Corliss's ambition just as much as I was. Corliss just used a different kind of poison on her. Because the code was actually good, Blythe, I said honestly. The software has potential. It was just being run by an idiot who cared more about magazine covers than server stability. And, because you are my sister, I did not want to see you in a federal prison. Blythe let out a heavy, shuddering breath. She closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them again, a strange, quiet resolve had settled over her features. I need a job, Marin, Blythe said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. You do not work for Apex, Blythe. I fired your entire executive team. You are completely locked out of the tech company. I know, Blythe said, taking a step closer. I do not want to work in tech. I do not want to be a CEO. I do not want to pretend to be a visionary anymore. I want to learn how the real world works. I want to learn what I should have learned 10 years ago. She looked down at my hands, at the faint, faded scars on my knuckles from my warehouse days, and then looked back up into my eyes. I want to stock shelves, Blythe said. Her voice was firm. No more tears. Let me come work at one of your supermarkets. Put me on the night shift. Pay me minimum wage. Let me haul boxes and mop floors and learn how to actually build something from the ground up, the way you did. Please, Marin. I need to break this cycle. The entire room was staring at Blythe as if she had lost her mind. The golden child, the princess of the family, was begging to do manual labor. Corliss looked like she was going to have a genuine heart attack. I looked at Blythe for a long time. I searched her eyes for any hint of manipulation, any trace of our mother's toxic influence. All I saw was a desperate, exhausted woman begging for a chance to start over in reality. I nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning, I said, my voice completely professional. Be at the distribution warehouse on Route 9 at 6 a.m. sharp. Wear steel-toed boots and clothes you do not mind ruining. You will start at the loading dock. You will make exactly $15 an hour. If you are 1 minute late, the shift manager will fire you on the spot. I will not protect you. You earn your keep, or you walk out the door. Blythe nodded vigorously, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her ruined makeup. I will be there at 5:45. Thank you, Marin. Thank you. I turned away from her, motioned for Hayes, and finally walked out of that suffocating dining room. I walked out the heavy front door, leaving the wreckage of my family's toxic hierarchy burning behind me. I had closed a lot of doors softly in my life. This time, I left it wide open, letting the cold, clean night air sweep through the house. The drive back to the city was quiet. I sat in the passenger seat of Hayes's sleek black car, watching the suburban streetlights blur past the window. The adrenaline that had kept my hands steady and my voice cold was finally starting to fade, leaving behind a profound, heavy exhaustion. Hayes drove with one hand on the steering wheel, glancing over at me occasionally. He did not ask how I was feeling. He knew me well enough to know I needed the silence to process the magnitude of what had just happened. I looked down at my hands. They were resting in my lap, the faint silver scars on my knuckles catching the passing lights. $1 billion in the bank, and my hands still remembered the feeling of freezing cardboard at 2 in the morning. I had spent my entire adult life trying to outrun the shadow of that 14-year-old girl, trying to build a fortress so high my mother's cruelty could never reach me again. But sitting in that dining room, looking at the cheap orange pricing gun, I realized the truth. You cannot heal a wound by simply covering it with expensive bandages. You have to expose it to the air. You have to stand in the light and let the people who hurt you see exactly what you survived. They said one daughter had a future and the other stocked shelves. They were right. I will always be the woman who stocks shelves. Because I am the one who restructures the chaos. I am the one who takes broken, failing systems and reorganizes them until they make sense. Tonight, I just finally restocked the shelves of my own life, putting the toxic, useless inventory right at the bottom where it belonged. It has been 6 months since that dinner party, and the aftermath has been exactly as brutal and necessary as I expected. Corliss did not believe I would actually evict her. She spent the first 3 weeks calling every relative in her contact list, sobbing and playing the victim, begging them to pressure me into letting her stay. But billionaires do not get pressured by middle-class guilt trips. When the 30th day arrived, my legal team sent the sheriff to change the locks. Corliss was forced to move into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town. None of the relatives offered to take her in. It turns out that when you build your entire personality around superiority and wealth, people disappear very quickly when the money runs dry. She still calls my office once a week, demanding to speak to her ungrateful daughter. My assistant routes her directly to a voicemail box that I never check. Merritt, the cowardly fiancé, tried to secure a position at a rival investment firm. But Wall Street is a very small town when you're at the top. A few quiet conversations over dinner with some influential board members, and Merritt found himself completely blacklisted from the high-end wealth management sector. Last I heard, he was selling life insurance out of a strip mall, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of success to a shrinking audience. And Blythe? Blythe actually showed up to the warehouse at 5:45 that morning. She wore cheap jeans and heavy boots. The shift manager, a massive, gruff man who had worked for me for 10 years, did not care that she used to wear silk dresses. He handed her a pair of gloves and pointed to a truck full of frozen goods. She lasted the entire shift. She came back the next day, and the day after that. She has been working at the warehouse for 6 months now. Her fingernails are ruined. She has lost the artificial, pampered glow she used to carry. But when we get coffee on Sunday mornings, a new tradition we started slowly, cautiously, she looks more alive than I have ever seen her. She is learning how to manage a logistics team. She is learning the value of a dollar she actually bled for. We are not best friends, but we are finally sisters. We are 2 women who survived the same hurricane, just from different sides of the storm. I still go undercover at my stores. I still put on the generic polo shirt and walk the aisles with a clipboard. I do it because it keeps me grounded. It reminds me that true power is not found in a chandelier or a $50 million lie. True power is knowing exactly what you are worth, even when you are wearing a name tag and holding a mop. If you have ever been the invisible child, the scapegoat, the one sitting in the shadows while the golden child takes the credit, I want you to know this. The people who try to convince you that you belong at the bottom are usually terrified of how high you can climb if they stop holding you down. Keep your head down. Keep building your empire in the dark. Because when you finally turn the lights on, the roaches will always scatter. But I have a question for you, and I really want to know what you think. A lot of people in my extended family, the ones who were too cowardly to speak up at the dinner table, have been whispering behind my back. They call me cold-blooded. They say that taking my own mother's house and putting her out on the street was a step too far, regardless of how terribly she treated me growing up. They say family is family, and a billionaire can afford to let an old woman keep her home. I do not feel a single ounce of guilt. I believe actions have consequences, and she finally met hers. But I am curious about your verdict. Did I go too far by taking her house and enforcing the eviction? Or did she deserve exactly what she got after 23 years of psychological abuse? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I will be reading through them to see who agrees with my ruthlessness. If you love this story and want to hear more satisfying tales of revenge, family drama, and toxic people getting exactly what they deserve, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow, and it guarantees you won't miss the next time someone tries to mess with the wrong family member. Until next time, stay strong, keep your hands steady, and never let anyone put a cheap price tag on your worth.